how do I maintain a relationship with somebody over a long period of time? I can't stress enough the value of a good thank you to somebody. Let's see what God's doing down the line.
What's the one thing you want somebody to take away from what you shared today?
If we don't pay attention to the questions that lost people are asking just so that we can answer the correct answer quickly, but instead, I wonder why they're asking this and what's the question behind the question, we miss a lot of stuff on the way, and I'm guilty of that.
So that's a great way to respond to that.
It's a good answer. It's a truthful answer.
But granted, you get excited about a lot of things.
I am. I'm a very excitable person. This is very true.
This week on the Reach Podcast. All right, welcome everybody. We are here this week on the Reach Podcast with my good friend Matt Burkett, and Matt is Search's area director in Greensboro, North Carolina. Matt, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
All right, so today we're going to talk about really, I guess, a couple conversations, because we're going to be talking about really a story that covers that first part of the second, or the first part of the number 2 in our 1, 2, 3 model, right?
Yeah.
So it's the idea that a person's spiritual journey is a process. So why don't you set up this process that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, and this is one of the most encouraging and liberating things about kind of Search's and Reach's evangelism philosophy is that, you know, it is a process and that I'm not the one driving it. And the freedom that you experience in that is there's no end zone to rush towards or push someone else towards. And I've found that that's been really freeing for me. And it seems to be the way Jesus would do it. So I think that's always worth paying attention to.
It is.
So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about my friend Brian. I've known Brian for about 3 or 4 years. And he was kind of reluctant to have conversations about faith life, and he ended up getting together in a small group of other guys that would meet every couple of weeks, and we kind of looked at some of those big topics in a group discussion format, which is a lot of fun because you've got different perspectives. And you know, my hope in those environments is, again, to kind of affirm that it's great when people share what they believe. It's a good thing when we become open and willing to discuss those things, but also I'll offer kind of my perspective as one to consider. And you know, we met as a group every other week for lunch for almost a year, going through questions, and sometimes it would be, oh, that's not a big one to us, but sometimes it would be we talk about pain and suffering, you know, and the problem of evil for a month.
Yeah.
And what I really wanted to talk to you about today, though, was a lunch that I had just with him.
Okay.
About a year and a half ago, after we'd gone through in this group format, I don't know, 7-8 months of meeting.
So already quite a process before you even get to this meeting.
Yeah, and along the way, just touching base with Brian, thanking him for coming. Yeah, I can't stress enough the value of a good thank you to somebody. Mm-hmm. But you know, really, this was an opportunity for us to sit down just one-on-one, kind of at a natural place where, hey, we've covered these kind of topics, and basically just went in wanting to kind of know where he was at.
Yeah. So how did it go?
You know, I think I'll share with you one of the most honest answers to a question I've ever heard. And you know, that I don't know how that sounds to you, but in essence, what I asked Brian is, I said, you know, we've spent a lot of time together. We've covered a lot of stuff, and I'm just curious kind of where you're at. And he said a couple of things that were really profound. He shared with me, you know, Matt, it occurs to me that a lot of the questions I had that some of which we've covered in this group and covered at kind of great length, either we've kind of answered pretty satisfactorily, or I've figured out that they're not all that important. Or option 3 is that if there is a God, I might not be meant to know it, or I might not be meant to know it now, and I'm okay with all that. And my ears, like everything perked up immediately. I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is really encouraging. Like, you know, it seems like he's come a long way. And I kind of said, so like, what are you trying to tell me, right? Yeah. And you know, and not to be cliche, like, are we going for the close today? Like, right? Is it time for the harvest? I apologize for Bible cliches.
We cut that out.
We'll cut that out. Okay. Anyhow, so the next thing, though, was when I said that he shared one of the most truthful things with me, it was also kind of one of the most heartbreaking things. And I kind of followed up that question by saying, well, Brian, what's keeping you from kind of taking whatever that next step is? Are you ready? He said, I got to tell you the truth, Matt. I don't want anybody putting their hand on my wallet, telling me I can't have a cigar, or asking me how much bourbon I'm drinking. And I was kind of struck and dumbfounded for about 10, 20 seconds. I said, Brian, who's to say that nobody's coming for your wallet? Nobody's coming for your cigars or your bourbon. Is that really what's holding you back? And then he gave me about 30 seconds of quiet and said, yeah, I don't know. And I thought, okay, this is where Brian and I no longer get to have these conversations. We've completely stalled out. This is kind of him saying, hey, I really appreciate the time and the friendship and the investment, but this is as far as I'm willing to go on this spiritual journey. Sure. Unfortunately, that's not what's happened.
So that was a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. Just kind of ended. By the way, I thought that was a very good response. That's on your feet and interesting. That's a great way to respond to that.
Yeah.
So bring us up to speed, current day.
Yeah. So again, I left that lunch and kind of got in the car, and after being so excited about how that conversation had started, where because we often think, well, if I could just answer all their questions, or if I could just lead them to find like good answers to all their questions, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to want to go all in with Jesus, right? And sometimes that's not what happens. Those intellectual barriers, those questions that they have, even if we help lead them to good answers, we never really know what's going on in here. And in kind of the context of this evangelism as a process, God's in charge of the results. This was a necessary part in the process for Brian, for sure. But I was really afraid that this is where he got off the train, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that our relationship was going to kind of go separately. Gratefully, that's not what's happened. I invited him to begin to participate in a group that was going to look more seriously at not just these questions about life in general and faith in general, but that would really take a real close look at kind of what I called it, I think, the life and times of Jesus according to Mark. And he said, you know what, I really think it would be good to spend some time. I've never really gone through one of the Gospels kind of line by line. And, I know you and I know a couple of the other guys in the group. I really want to do this. I was blown away. I thought after the last time we met, this relationship's been kind of come to its natural end. And so he came to the first one of these groups about 5 or 6 months ago, and he hasn't missed once. He's now asking questions, and this is something, if we don't pay attention to the questions that lost people are asking, just so that we can answer the correct answer quickly, but instead, I wonder why they're asking this and what's the question behind the question.
Yeah.
We miss a lot of stuff on the way, and I'm guilty of that. I've done that hundreds of times because I get so excited, like I think something's happening here. But granted,
you get excited about a lot of things.
I am. I'm a very excitable person. This is very true.
Hey, everybody. I wanted to take a moment and let you know that the Reach podcast is brought to you by Search, a ministry dedicated to sharing Jesus through friendships and conversations for nearly 50 years. Learn more or get involved at searchnational.org.
He's beginning to ask questions that show me that, hey, even in this period of kind of no man's land between that lunch we had and when this group started up, he's continued doing research. He's continued his investigation on his own. And in fact, I can see how happy he is to share something with the group as we're going through of something that, hey, I uncovered this. And again, I think the significance of trusting that God has the full story, has the whole script in the life of not only you, but the person that you're seeking to share Jesus with. But also knowing that it usually doesn't happen at a seminar. It's not an overnight trip and this deal's done. And there's stuff going on in that subterranean level of the human heart that we don't really know about often until they ultimately, either invite you to be a part of them coming to faith or share with you down the line. Oh yeah, that was a meaningful thing, because Billy Graham once said something like, for every person who thinks they helped somebody get saved, there's 39 people who feel like they did nothing, right? I think there's a lot of truth to that. I'm not sure about the exact breakdown of the numbers, but what I have noticed is if we manage our friendships and our expectations well, if we communicate well, if we listen well with non-believers, and we don't try to force things, oftentimes we're one of those first calls when it becomes a priority again. We often get kind of a front row seat to see what God's doing in their lives just by being good friends, just by being good question askers, good listeners.
So would you say that Brian has taken that step of faith now with Jesus?
So interesting. This was 2 weeks ago. We had another lunch.
Okay.
And just kind of say, hey, I can tell that this has been, you've really enjoyed even more so than the first time we got together and kind of were looking at like 10,000 foot view of these big questions. You've really enjoyed digging into the Gospel of Mark. He said, well, last time we were together, we as a group looked at the first parable Jesus ever told, right? That's what you said, Matt, right? The parable of the four soils. And I said, yeah. And as we were kind of talking through that, I could acknowledge points in my life and parts of my heart today that I could say, I'm really receptive here. I'm just hard path over here. You can't penetrate. Hey, here's something that, man, I get excited about, but it burns up quickly and kind of fades away. And then here's stuff that I know should be important to me that I let other stuff in my life choke out. And he said, right now, I wish that last one I mentioned, that choked out soil, that's where God is right now for me. And he's been there for a long time, where I've let, stuff with the kids, stuff with work, other things choke it out. And I really want to see that soil turn into the fertile soil. And again, I left this super encouraged. And I said, well, do you think you know how to do that? He said, no. Okay, that's a good answer. It's a truthful answer. And so I just encouraged him and said, Brian, I think whether you realize it or not, that's already a beginning, right? For you to even acknowledge that that's where God has been. And I would argue, Brian, actually God was on the hard path for you when I first met you. And there may have been moments where you've covered all sorts of soil terrain here, but I think that, there's the potential that you're in and among the thorns that might choke out what I think you're seeking, what God's trying to do in your life. But I think you got a lot better soil than you give yourself credit for. I said, and I can only share with you what I've found to be the best way to till up the soil of your heart, and that is to invite God to do it. Because frankly, I can't give you some checklist to go throw these things away when you get home, open up the paint. Like it's not a diet. This is something that God has to act on. And I want to just encourage you, and with your permission, I'm going to pray that God continues to till up the other soil in your heart. And I think if the two of us are praying for that, let's see what God's doing down the line.
Yeah, man, a great story, really. A great picture of being in a relationship for the long run with somebody and trusting God with the process and seeing where it goes. Thank you for being willing to share it. And I hope maybe you can come back and fill us in on the end of the story.
I'd love
at
to
some
give you an
point.
update. Yeah.
Okay, before we go, what's the one thing you want somebody to take away from what you shared today? Number one thing, they're leaving, they're going to do, who knows what they're doing right now. They're getting out of their truck.
Yeah, I would say just maintaining a relationship, even when you feel like they're not making progress either the way you want, at the pace you want, whatever that is, but maintaining that relationship above all else is the best thing you can do, because we really do trust that God's the one who's responsible for results.
Fantastic. Great way to end. Matt, thank you so much
Thank you, Blaine,
for being on the podcast. See ya.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Reach Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. That'd be a good idea. Share it with a friend and leave us a review to help others find the podcast. Now, for more resources, please visit reachothers.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.